Hey guys, welcome back to Mystifying Miracles. I'm Kristen, and we are going to dive right in. Another true story for you today that involves miracles. So here we go. One night, a man named Jack Olson awakened from his sleep all of a sudden, and he was startled. He had been having a dream, and what woke him up was hearing the blast of a trumpet. He immediately gently awakens his wife, Doreen, and he says, "Did you hear that?" And she's kind of confused and sleepy-eyed, and she's like, "No, what?" He begins to tell her, "I was having this amazing dream, and trumpet blast just woke me out of a dead sleep." Well, 2 years prior to this happening, Jack and Doreen had kind of been on a downward slope. So many negative things were just happening in their lives. They didn't have hardly any money. The bank was about to foreclose on their home. Just little things over that 2-year period that was just devastating to them. When I say they didn't have money, I mean that. They literally had a few dollars in their bank account, a half a tank of gas, and one car that they owned. That was it. Another issue, Jack was now 60 years old. He didn't have a degree. Therefore, because of his age and that, it was hard to find a job. And they had no clue what in the world they were going to do. The sad part of it was this home that was about to be foreclosed on, they had lived in it for over 27 years. They had raised their 5 children in it. It was filled with love and laughter and memories, and that was all about to be gone. You know, Jack and Doreen, they'd pray together all the time about this situation over that 2 years and up into the present, and things just kept spiraling, going down and down. They would speak to friends, couples of theirs, and their friends were also struggling with money at the time, but they'd see their friends have little miracles happen in their lives, and they were happy for them. But at the same time, they thought, gosh, I really, really wish God would send a miracle for us, you know? Like, for instance, one couple friend of theirs had been praying, you know, just about their money troubles and things like that, and for God to please provide money to help them pay their bills somehow, some way. And it actually happened. Somebody, the story didn't mention who, just showed up unannounced to these friends' porch, knocked on the door, and gave them money, which was an answered prayer. It was enough to cover their need at that time. So they'd see little things like this happening in the people's lives around them, but it wasn't happening for Jack and Doreen, and they couldn't understand why. There came a time where one day Jack and Doreen were in their living room and they were just chatting together, and, you know, they were feeling down. They were feeling low. And so Jack mentioned, you know, maybe God abandoned us. I don't know why, but maybe that's what happened, you know, and it's a funny thing. Well, not funny, but, you know, when you get so tied up in your emotions and the sadness or your troubles, the mind can do weird things like that, or rather, the enemy can. He knows you're at a low point, so he's going to attack, and he's going to make you feel lower than low. And I think that's what happened in Jack and Doreen's case at this point in time. Well, present day, there came a Friday where Jack actually scored an interview, and it was with a conveyor company. So he goes into the interview that Friday morning, talks to him, and he's actually offered the job on the spot. But Jack turns it down. And here's why. Jack said he couldn't fit in with the company's ethics. He said if he took that job, it wouldn't allow him personally to keep honoring God. And he said that wasn't worth the risk. Now, my opinion right here, I think this is awesome because that shows strength. Where most people would probably cave and be like, oh gosh, I just need a job, money, you know, to pay my bills. I don't care. It's not me. I'm going to take it. But Jack rose above, and he knew that, no, I can't do that in good conscience. So good for him. I mean, that's just my little tidbit opinion on that part of the story. But that just struck me when I read it the first time through because I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. So, of course, Jack gets in his car. He heads home after that interview that, turned down the job and all. And he's feeling low again. And he drives past an old business that he recognized just in passing. And he's like, oh, I know the owner of that guy. So he turns around and he actually makes a visit. Jack goes inside and he sees an older gentleman working at the front. And he asks him, hey, do you have Ron Baldwin's number? Ron Baldwin was the owner of this place. And so the old man says, yeah, sure. Writes it down, gives it to him. Jack thanks him and goes on his way. He goes back home. He tells his wife about the interview, why he had to turn it down, but then he also tells him about stopping by Ron Baldwin's business. So they chat, and after they chat, he goes into another room to call Ron Baldwin. Ron recognized Jack's voice immediately, and he was so happy to hear from him. And in fact, he told Jack, he's like, hey, a few months back, I tried to call you several times, but I couldn't get a hold of you. So he told Jack, hey, come back to the office when you have some free time, and maybe we can just get reacquainted. Well, Jack thought this was fantastic. He didn't have anything to do in the moment. I mean, he was free, so he actually went straight there right then. The two men talked from 2 to 6 p.m. that day, and they had such a good time chatting and catching up that they decided to get back together and chat some more on that following Saturday. So they did just that, and they were together chatting and having a good time from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. that Saturday. And it was decided that, he told Jack, hey, come back in on Monday and check out a line of fishing tackle products that Ron had going on. So Jack says, okay, great. I'll see you then. Finally, a little bit of good news and hope. And he was excited to tell Doreen about it. So that Monday, Jack drives in, chats with Ron about fishing line products, and Ron wants him to come back the following Tuesday. Well, Jack had to... And he was embarrassed by this, but he had to be honest. So Jack told Ron, he's like, I'm sorry, I don't even have gas money to come back tomorrow. Well, Ron didn't hesitate. He actually pulled out, no joke, $2,000 in cash, and he hands it over to Jack. By noon that day, Jack was home telling Doreen, you will never believe it. And she smiled and she said, that's great. But we have a big problem. What are we going to do about the bank foreclosing on our home? Also, another thing that happened that same Monday or the following Monday, Jack actually had a meeting with a former employee he used to work with. And it happened to be with a company that Jack had started several years prior. And so he goes and visits with that former employee. And the man was actually interested in buying some of Jack's stocks. He was like, hey, if you still have those, I'd really like to buy some off of you. So the following day, that Tuesday, Jack meets him and he offers the former employee, the dude, he offers him $8,500 for 10,000 shares. Well, the man accepts, takes it, gives Jack the check. And this was great. I mean, it was just like, the prior Sunday night, they had no money, no gas, nothing, banks foreclosing on their home. And now Jack was on the way to deposit $10,500 in the bank. Wednesday rolled around the following day, and Jack heard a voice. He knew it was God. And the voice said, go withdraw $6,000. Jack was like, what? He began to argue with God. He was like, the check won't have cleared yet. That was just yesterday. Like, that's not a good idea. I need to wait a little bit. And God answered back, no, you need to do it and do it now. So with hesitation, Jack heads to the bank. Within an hour, he had the cash in hand. He then heard a voice, that same voice that he knew was God. And it said, great. Now get on your good clothes and head to the mortgage bank. Fast. So this time Jack wasn't going to argue. He did it. He obeyed, and he did exactly that to a T. He got there within minutes. Literally minutes, the story said, to avoid $1,500 in legal fees. So it actually ended up saving him money. Jack knew that those 2 years of just terrible trials in, their lives, it was now over. So many doors had opened, more so than him and Doreen could ever fathom. And he knows that, hey, all those times, all those days, for 2 years, he was so low and so down and didn't understand. He knew now God was working on him to teach him how to truly and fully trust him in all things. A quote from Jack. It's a short one. He says, "I stand in awe at his timing and orchestration of events." At the end of this story, out of the miracle book I read it in, Jack begins to say that, hey, if you're hearing this or reading this, it is not by accident. He says, just like it wasn't an accident that he passed by Ron Baldwin's building that day when he was feeling low and had to turn down a job offer. It's not by accident. There are no coincidences. And I loved also at the end of this little story, it had a little bit of background, not too much, but enough to be like, wow, I wouldn't have thought that. So it said that Jack, he was a former atheist. He used to be involved in psychic phenomena and Eastern teachings. And he says that it was because of a statement that had been made by an atheist scientist that led him to read the Bible. And it was going to be for, scientific purposes. He was just curious. And I'm not sure what the statement was that scientist had said that triggered this within Jack, but it triggered him nonetheless. He began to read the Bible, and by the time he got through the first 4 books, he says he knew, without a doubt, God was alive. He said then 3 things began to happen after that occurred. 1, he says he remembers feeling like just an excitement, almost like a jubilation. He said he wanted to shout it from the rooftops. And to some, that might sound weird if you don't know God. But man, if you do, you would know what Jack's talking about here. He wanted to shout it that, hey, man, you can have eternal life and God is real. He loves you. He says, too, little miracles began to happen in Jack's life. In this particular story, it didn't go into the details of those, but he said there were several, and those began to happen after that point. Number 3, Jack began to write down, journal it out when these little miracles began to happen. And he says he soon found himself writing for other people as well about their miracles. And that led to turning into a ministry. And that ministry is called The Word of Our Testimony. Just a very cool story. And I love hearing testimonies about that. For instance, a couple of days ago, I was feeling down, kind of the same scenario. It's like, I'm trying to be patient, God, but how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to continue to get through this life when everything is so crazy? I had to stop myself, and I had to really, really concentrate on the verses in the Bible that give me hope, that don't allow me to keep thinking in that negative state. Reading this story really, really just, I guess, does give me hope, hearing somebody else's experience, because we all need that from time to time. We're all struggling, no matter what it be, whether it's money troubles or relationships or, so it's just good to hear other people's experiences because it really, really does help, I think, anyway. But let me know what you guys think, and if you feel like sharing maybe your experience. Other than that, guys, I thank you so much for watching. I really do value you guys, and I'm so appreciative, so thank you. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you next time.